Hello, everyone. I want to welcome you all to our webinar today. My name is Jackie Foley. I'm the Vice President of Sales at Gigit. Thank you for joining us today. In a few minutes, I will be introducing you to our speakers. First, I wanted to share with you who Gigit is and what we do. Gigit is a cybersecurity firm. We offer cybersecurity consulting services. We have some of the best engineering staff in the industry who deliver immediate and long-term solutions to businesses from enterprise level to Fortune 500. Our security specialists hold the highest security certifications, as well as have extensive experience working with different government institutions around the world. So, moving along, and before we get started, I wanted to note that if you have any questions or comments about today's webinar, there will be time at the end of the webinar for open discussion, and we encourage any questions from you. Please use the Zoom Q&A feature to forward your questions at that time. Let's go ahead and get started. I'd like to introduce you to two of my colleagues, Mike Anglin and Martin Volk. Mike Anglin is Gigit's Chief Information Officer and will be hosting our presentation. Mike has been working in IT and security for over 20 years. His experience working with SMB and enterprise has focused on network security and data risk assessments. Martin Volk is Gigit's Chief Information Security Officer, who is our featured speaker today. Martin is in IT security. He is an IT security veteran with 23 years of experience in IT security. He has worked for Fortune 1000 companies and various government entities worldwide, and again, currently serving as CISO at Gigit. Martin has significant experience in both defensive and offensive security and holds some of the industry's most prestigious certifications. Mike, I'll let you go ahead and take it from here.
Thanks, Jackie. Thanks everybody for joining us today. So we're gonna kind of talk a little bit about malware to begin with, and then lead into some specific types of malware, specifically around ransomware. We're gonna key in on. So to get that started, Martin, why don't you just kind of tell us a little bit about the different kinds of malware that are out there?
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Mike. Good morning, good afternoon, everyone on the call. So what types of malware do we have? We need to take a step back first of all, and what is a malware, or what is considered malware? So in the most basic form, a malware is a virus. And I think every one of us has come across a virus in the past. Strictly speaking, malware is a piece of software, is a piece of program which leads to any violation of the CIA triad, which is the confidentiality, integrity, and availability. So any software which is trying to steal or disclose information, alter information, or impact availability is considered malware. So it's a bad piece of software which we don't want to have in our networks. From a security standpoint, the different categories in malware are viruses, Trojan horses, and also ransomware. And in this webinar, we are specifically focusing on ransomware.
Interesting. So ransomware is a type of malware. How is it different, and what does it do?
Ransomware in that respect is different because, as the name suggests, it's requiring the victim to pay a ransom. So in other words, what ransomware does, it's infecting your machine, and then it's starting to encrypt files. Those may be personal files, documents, or system files. And the user is then being asked to pay a ransom, typically in Bitcoin, to the attacker.
Okay, so instead of putting in a backdoor or something, it just goes straight to the jugular and encrypts all the files. And
Exactly.
and I think a lot of us on the call have seen a lot of ransomware in the news, and some of the different companies that have been hit. A lot of governments have been hit, local governments, towns and stuff. yeah, how does it target? What does ransomware do specifically to target a machine?
I mean, there are numerous ways from the criminal perspective to distribute ransomware. So a classic one is by email. So they're simply sending out phishing, spear phishing emails with attachments, and these attachments contain ransomware. So that may be a PDF, an Excel file, a Word document, or as trivial as a picture. And users then who click or open these files or unzip those files will then install the ransomware on their machines. So email is certainly one of the preferred ways of spreading ransomware. The other things we have seen is the so-called drive-by malware. It's also very popular. Again, phishing is used for this quite significantly. And when someone then clicks on a link in a phishing email, they will simply direct the user's browser to a website, which is then infecting, drive-by infecting the user's machine. So it's as easy as just clicking on a link. You don't even have to install anything. If you go to the wrong website, you could infect yourself with malware. And then the third distribution angle attackers have is portable media. So that's like, you know, USB, flash drives, portable media, removable hard drives, storage devices, and all these kind of things, which are typically being plugged into a USB port. So as an example, an attacker may target a large bank. They will go to the public coffee area, will lay out 100 USB sticks. Those 100 USB sticks will say free Amazon vouchers with a nice Amazon logo on top of it. And then a lot of users, unfortunately, will grab those and will plug them into their machine. So that is just another example how this threat vector can be realized.
Well, so that's a good point. If I grab one of these USBs then and plug it into my machine, will my antivirus or anti-malware catch that?
Some of the anti-malware, antivirus software installations may catch it, but it's still a gamble, because normally ransomware or these ransomware detection engines work on something we call signature basis. So in other words, if the ransomware is known to the community already, it will pick it up. It's a very similar system than an antivirus system. However, if the bit structure is changed on the ransomware and attackers are constantly refining their software code in order to make it undetectable. So there's no 100% guarantee. I mean, we have heuristic approaches these days where, you know, anti-malware tries to also detect previously unknown ransomware, but it's still a gamble because you never know how sophisticated the code is.
Got it. So once I open it or click on the attachment or anything like that, what is it just installed right away or
it's typically
right
installing it. Yeah, it's typically installing it right away. When you click it, it's almost like sometimes you even may get pop-up warnings. It's an unsecure source. Do you really want to install it? And the users keep clicking and clicking. And that's pretty much the equivalent of saying that, yes, I want to be infected. So even if your defense mechanisms pick it up, if you accept it as a user and if you install it, that's pretty much like saying, yes, I want to be hacked. I want to be infected.
Okay, well, so is there anything I can do before this happens to help prevent?
Yes, there are numerous ways. I mean, first and foremost, user education is probably the most important part here, to educate all users, not just the IT users, but everyone in the organization around the threats around malware and the distribution channels, which we just talked about. Like, for example, be careful in emails. If you get an email, don't just open the attachment, don't just click on the link, even though if the email seems to come from a trusted source, like a superior or like your manager or family, be very, very careful, because very often these emails or these requests are being spoofed. So they're not actually coming from the person they are looking to come from. But user education is key. On a technical level, yes, you should also implement ransomware detection prevention systems, for example, antivirus, anti-malware installations. There are email spam filtering solutions which can catch a significant amount of these as well. You can use email encryption, digital certificates for email, where you actually make sure that if you receive an email from Mike Smith in your organization, that it's really coming from the Mike Smith and not someone who is pretending to be Mike Smith. So there's technical controls, and then also a good backup strategy is really paramount and is really important. So what we see in the industry, that a lot of companies back up their servers and their cloud services on a regular basis. What we also see in the industry is that a lot of people, so they're regular laptops, and this is key to mitigate the risk on ransomware, that you have regular backups, ideally once a day, of your endpoints as well. Because when you get hit, you can then re-image that infected machine with a good known image, and you can restore it to that point before the infection happened effectively. So there are numerous ways to tackle this proactively.
Yeah, and it seems like not just with ransomware, but with malware in general, email spoofing and spear phishing attacks seem to be one of the biggest vectors right now for these things to be spread and for people to get caught in that. Is there anything specifically, you mentioned one or two things already, is there anything specifically around spoofing that we can do to help prevent that?
Absolutely. So most modern email communication systems and services like software as a service installations, like for example, Office 365, has the option that you can flag internal messages versus external messages. So in other words, when you're receiving an email from outside the organization, it can always, add a little footer and say like, hey, be careful, this email is coming from an outside source. It's not trusted. It's not coming from within your domain. That's a very, very easy feature to build in, because if someone is trying to spoof the email account of your chief executive officer, of your CEO, and then even though the name may be similar or identical to the real CEO, that will still catch it, because it's obviously not coming from a real account. It's actually coming from a spoofed account, which is just pretending to use this email address.
I got it. So now to the crux of the problem. Let's say maybe I even put all these mechanisms in place to try to prevent the malware from getting into my system and ransomware from infecting our servers and our laptops. Say I did follow some of these recommendations, but we still get hit. Is there anything we can do, or what can be done once you've been infected by ransomware into your systems?
So once you're infected, I mean, the first thing you would do is carefully evaluate the damage done so far, like the number of infected machines, and you should try to isolate the problem as quickly as possible. So isolate the infected machines from the real network, because there's ransomware strains which propagate themselves like a worm. And effectively, you want to make sure you want to contain the damage to a minimum. So that's step number one. Step number two, if you follow the proactiveness we just discussed, would be to roll back, to use the backup you have in order to reinstall the machine with a clean image. If you haven't done this, you still have other options. You can bring in a forensic expert, and the forensic expert will then re-engineer the malware in order to try to retrieve the decryption key. Now, in some, in some cases, this may be possible. In other cases, it may not be possible. It always depends on the sophistication of the malware code. So we know of cases where we were able to actually reverse engineer a malware strain in order to recover the key and then decrypt the files. That that is possible, but it's not always possible because it depends how well the code is written. You can also consult websites like the FBI website, which has numerous ransomware software installations decrypted already. So the police forces around the world, they are also trying to help people in order to get their data back without paying the ransom. So there is numerous decryption keys for different kinds of malware available, publicly available on the police websites as well. So you can do this. The last thing really you want to do is you don't want to pay the ransom because it fuels the fire. And the more success those criminals have, the more ransomware they will spread.
And I gotta assume that you're rolling the dice at that point, whether they'll even give you the key or not, even if you do pay them.
Correct.
So, well, thank you very much, Martin. You know what I'd like to do now is hand this back over to Jackie and open it up for any questions that people have, and let Martin kind of answer anything you guys have questions about. Jackie?
Great. Thanks, Mike. Thanks, Martin. Yeah, let's go ahead and, as Mike said, and open the discussion up. And again, please use the Q&A feature to forward your questions. And while we wait for those questions to come in, Martin, can you tell us a little bit more about you and your background?
Absolutely. So I'm in the IT industry for 23 years now. I started on the defensive side, so mainly on the Cisco firewall and IDS IPS side. And then pretty much like 13 years ago, I moved over to the offensive side, mainly penetration testing, vulnerability management. So I'm in both worlds, so to speak. I've done a lot of certifications throughout my career, from the Cisco CCIE certification back in 2004. I've done the offensive security ethical hacking certifications, the OCP and OSWP. I have worked pretty much all over the world on projects, many years for Cisco, for Motorola, for British Telecom, for government entities. And yeah, now I'm serving as the CISO at Gigit. And that is pretty much a short rundown of my background. If you want to have more information, please check out my LinkedIn profile as well. And you can always contact me through LinkedIn as well, if you like.
Great. All right, Martin, thank you. And we do have some questions. So the first here, I'd like to ask Martin, what types of protection should a business employ? Defense in depth, DNS, filtering?
Yeah, I mean, there's obviously best practices list. Industries, and I mean, it's always dependent which industry you are in. So there are industry specific regulations. For example, if you're in the finance industry, you have to follow like Gramm-Leach-Bliley. If you're in the credit card industry or you're processing credit cards, you have to follow PCI. If you handle healthcare information, it's HIPAA. But at the end of the day, there are common standards and common security practices, which are outlined typically in the ISO 27001, 27002, and also in the NIST frameworks. So the NIST framework is one of the best options, which explains you defense in depth. So what we mean by defense in depth is like a layered approach to security. We don't really want to rely on a single entity for security. So we don't just want to have a firewall, and if the firewall fails, we are wide open. So we want to have endpoint protection. We want to have anti-malware protection, which falls into endpoint protection. We want to have network application protection. We want to have sound risk management. So it's always good to follow like the NIST and or ISO guidelines on corporate security.
Okay, great. Great question. We do have another. What is the best way to detect fileless attacks?
Fileless attacks?
Yes.
Could you elaborate a bit more what exactly the question is from the person? May I just put this back?
PowerShell?
And then, oh yes, so
yeah.
Microsoft PowerShell, yes, it's that's a very interesting topic, because PowerShell is a scripting language within the Microsoft system, and it's heavily abused by users. Or I shouldn't say users, I should say attackers. And for example, plugging in like a USB rubber ducky with a PowerShell code is most likely to execute the malicious code on the machine without the system intervening. So it's a massive open attack vector. One thing I can recommend in general is always make sure users do not have administrative privileges. So you can prevent a lot of harm from a machine if they don't have administrative privileges, and subsequently any piece of malware or any piece of Trojan horse or malicious code cannot leverage these privileges from an administrator's point of view. As a user account, the damage is likely to be less than if it's an administrative account.
Okay, all right, very good. Moving on to, we do have yet another question. Does Gigit offer services my company can engage if we're attacked?
Absolutely, we offer these services. So we actually offer these services on a fairly frequent basis these days. One of the services is incident response, for example. So incident response it links in with forensic analysis, but incident response first and foremost is detecting the threat, mitigating the threat, and helping customers to get back online, because that's the business priority from a business impact assessment plan perspective. So we first and foremost want to get the customer online again, because productivity is very important. We also then offer forensic examination services. So if the customer, for example, needs to prove their due care, their due diligence, that the hacker got in XYZ, but we had the security defense features in place, and the hacker still got in. So that's very, very important from a due care perspective. Also, in some cases, there may be legal actions down the line from customers or from authorities. So what we can do is we can help gathering evidence and making sure that this evidence is preserved, is handled correctly from a chain of custody perspective, and can be used in court or by law enforcement. So we offer all these services.
Great, well, that's great. Okay, well, very good. I think that will be the end of our Q&A for now. I will make this discussion, this webinar, available to you all, so for future reference. And again, I want to thank you all for joining us today. If you have any questions about ransomware or anything to do with cybersecurity overall, please send me an email. And if you'd like to meet up with the Gigit team, we will be attending the RSA conference in San Francisco, February 24th through 28th. And we can meet you at the event, grab a coffee, go to lunch, what have you. But we would look forward to meeting with you. Thanks again, everyone, and make it a great rest of the day.